So we are being left in the dust by the rest of the world, and that we think is attributable to the policy environment that we operate in.
Economically, South Africa is falling behind in the world, even when the country is compared to its emerging market peers. In this extract from an exclusive client webinar, CRA Director John Endres discusses some of the constraints on economic growth. Also a reminder, we are hosting an exclusive client webinar later today at 1 o'clock, where we will unpack the failing education system in South Africa, as well as the growing skills shortage. We hope to see you there.
Here we'll show you from the dawn of the democratic era through to projections in 2023, the real GDP growth rate first for South Africa. Those are these red bars. It is a shape you will become familiar with through this briefing because we use it repeatedly. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that you can identify two periods here, which is the first half of the democratic era from 1994 to about 2007, 2008, where growth was pretty decent. It topped out above 5% during the latter part of that era, but it was consistently pretty strong. However, since 2008, from about 2009, you can see that growth really drops off, battled to crack the 2%, then dropped below the 2%, crawled along at just over 0%. Then in 2020, we had that big COVID slump, a little bit of a bounce back in 2021, but it looks like we are returning in the next few years to that very low growth trajectory of between 1.5 and 2%. So that's where we find ourselves. Why did this break, this discontinuity happen in 2008? One reason is the global financial crisis. So that certainly had an impact on the South African economy, as you can see here, as it did on many other countries. But then secondly, also, we had a change in government. It was the year that Jacob Zuma took over from President Mbeki. It was the start of the era of state capture, and it was also an era when the capacity and the competence of the state, as well as the policy environment, were not hospitable to growth. And we see the effects of that very visibly illustrated on these GDP bars. We wanted to get a sense of how South Africa was doing compared to the rest of the world. So we compared the South African growth rate to the rest of the world growth rate. And again, you'll see the story of two eras up to 2007-8. The South African growth rate is keeping pace with the rest of the world. Those are those black bars. But then from 2010, the rest of the world goes into recovery mode, grows pretty well. But South Africa is falling far behind. We could argue that South Africa should be compared to its peers, which would be emerging markets. And if you do that, we add those orange bars. And the picture that emerges is even less satisfactory. You can see that South Africa did its best to keep up with the rest of the world in those mid-2000s, did pretty well. But then since 2009, 2010, after the global financial crisis, these emerging markets were really powering along, chugging along with their growth rates, where South Africa was right here at the bottom. So we are being left in the dust by the rest of the world, and that we think is attributable to the policy environment that we operate in. In a way, this is a uniquely bad performance in the world that we are producing. And you'll see some other impacts of that bad performance in the next few slides that we're coming to. We'll also look at the GDP per capita. So if you take the value of all the goods and services produced in South Africa in a year, the GDP, and you divide it by the number of people, you get a GDP per capita. Those are the red bars. And in South Africa, you can see that that really rose very nicely. Up to 2008, people were getting richer on average. And as a result, feeling slightly more optimistic about their prospects for the future. But since 2009, 2010, that GDP per capita hasn't increased. And as a matter of fact, under the impression of the COVID contraction, if you compare this GDP per capita in 2021, you go back through history, you see the last time it was this low was in 2006. So that's effectively 15 years of no growth in GDP per capita. That's a very bad thing. When we're looking at these statistics, we noticed a similarity in the shape of two graphs. And the second one that we noticed the similarity in was electricity production. And of course, this is immediately and intuitively obvious that there should be a link between these two things. You can see that in the first half of the democratic era, the economy was growing, GDP per capita was growing, and so also electricity production was increasing. Load shedding started in 2007, 2008. That's when things started going wrong. And since then, South Africa has not managed to produce growing amounts of electricity. And this is a reflection of a mutual relationship. So if the economy is not growing, then it's not going to need electricity. So you don't produce so much, you don't consume so much. But conversely also, if the electricity grid is not able to expand production, that also imposes a cap on economic growth. And you'll see repeatedly over the past few years, whenever growth looked like it was going to take off, load shedding came back and growth got cut. And so this black line, electricity production as representing capacity to produce electricity, we think imposes a hard cap on growth. It means that growth will stay probably below 2% until this cap is lifted, until capacity increases. So that's where we find ourselves at the moment.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like and share this video. Also, if you're not a subscriber yet, please click on the link in the description below to gain access to our 30-day free trial. Till next time, take care.